Welcome to Crypto Sapiens, a show that hosts lively discussions with innovative Web3 builders to help you learn about decentralized money systems, including Ethereum, Bitcoin, and DeFi. The podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and it is not financial advice. Crypto Sapiens is presented in partnership with Bankless DAO, a movement for pioneers seeking freedom from the limitations of the traditional financial system. Bankless DAO will help the world go bankless by creating user-friendly on-ramps for people to discover decentralized financial technologies through education, media, and culture.
Welcome to Decentralized, where we explore the social layer of decentralized science. What does it mean to decentralize science? My name is Elijah, and in this series, we'll consider the fundamental aspects of science as a social activity and an institution through the lens of various contributors in the DeSci space. The first 4 episodes are published as a mini-series and lay the groundwork for future conversations. Our goal is to facilitate an exchange of ideas between people working on the solutions to these fundamental problems. Let's start the show.
We are live with Decentralized. This is the second installment of the first 4 episodes of Decentralized will be a mini-series. And so they're coordinated into sort of a series of experiment-style discussions. And so today is the second topic of funding, intellectual property, and ownership. And we have 3 excellent guests here today. Yeah, so these our 3 guests today are truly excellent thought leaders and contributors in this space and have been working on this topic for a while. So Decentralized is a show focused on the social layer of DeSci. And so science is an inherently social activity, and we're exploring the fundamental concepts behind DeSci and what really makes it different than traditional science, or can be traditional science. And so today we're talking about what I think are 3 very pervasive and integrated concepts in terms of what is access to funding. I think that's a very core theme in DeSci, and that's something we talked about in the first installment of this series. And intellectual property and ownership, the ability to own your own information is fundamental. I think probably the most basic core tenet of Web3. So thank you again for our guests for joining us today. We'll be exploring these topics and how you arrived at what you've been doing and your values and how they contribute to what you work on in the space. So I'd like to introduce Savva Kerdemelidis, who is co-founder of Crowdfunded Cures, and we'll talk a little bit more about that today. And Trent, McConaghy, who is co-founder of Ocean Protocol, a technology that I've learned quite a bit about in my own work. And basically, they are building a decentralized data marketplace for data ownership. And Laurence, who is a deal flow and grants contributor over at Vita, which is working on longevity and funding decentralized solutions in science and research in longevity science. So thank you for our 3 guests joining us today. My background is in molecular biology. I'm a contributor here at Crypto Sapiens now for since the early days of the show. And our whole goal here is to create a place where we can have these community discussions and reflect on these topics and connect different people from different projects. So thank you again for everyone joining us. And I'd love to invite you all to do a short introduction for yourselves, and then we can get this conversation going.
I'm Trent. Great to be here, and thanks for having me. And yeah, I guess from the perspective of IP ownership and a DeSci side, I've done a bunch of science, engineering stuff through grad school. Writing a PhD, writing books, that sort of thing. Focusing on creative AI and how to leverage tools of computation and AI to design computer chips and other things better to sort of augment human intelligence. And I did that through a PhD and also through a couple startups on that, which were basically CAD tools for computer chip design. And then since 2013, I've been working in blockchain land. First of all, with something called a scribe, which was, these days you would say NFTs on Bitcoin. Back then, 2013, 2014, it was all, completely new. So we just used, we actually called it IP on the chain because it was about claiming copyright and then sub-licenses after. So we were We even had a full-time lawyer who worked out all the legals back 2013, 2014, 2015, drawing on IP contracts from the past, things like Second Life and so on. So that was that, and then we pivoted from that into a blockchain database, and from that into, we were too early with the first thing, 2013, 2015, just too early. But by 2017, we were focused on Ocean Protocol, which took a lot of those initial ideas, which were more around digital art and IP around that, and instead twisted it towards data. And it's because I had this AI background. I saw how, claiming IP on data and being able to give access to it and share it and have data marketplaces, all of that, the tools of Web3 could help a lot, as well as leveraging the traditional tools of copyright law and other IP law. So that's been my focus for the last 5 years, and the focus for the foreseeable future as well, with Ocean Protocol. And, we've been live for 2-3 years now. We keep shipping new versions. We just shipped our V4 recently. And yeah, the tech's got quite mature and lots of cool things there. Not just if you're buying and selling data, but in general, if you're a data scientist and want to, build models, sell models, all of that. And once again, great to be here. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Trent. Excellent. Yeah, I really think the ability to monetize and own data in Web3 is really changing how we think about things. Savva, I heard you unmuted earlier as well. Would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. Hi, guys. So, yeah, my name's Savva Kerdemelidis. I'm the founder of Crowdfunded Cures. My background is in commercial and IP law, and my interest in this space, and particularly DeSci, I did biology actually at uni, but then kind of went into the legal side. But then got back into this kind of space at the time my fiance got sick with Crohn's and going online, and I realized there's a lot of problems with how IP is structured and how it kind of basically pushes research in a certain direction, particularly patents. Basically, if you can't enforce a monopoly price over your therapy, then you've sort of got no business model under the patent system, and there's no VCs will fund you, even if your intervention might be very effective or curative, even, and extremely valuable to the government. There's no incentives under the patent system to fix that. And sort of coming at it from a contractual legal perspective, I realized it's just because the contract, the social contract we have with patents is focused on, it's not really appropriate, I guess, for other kinds of therapies, which I call unmonopolizable therapies. And what we're looking at essentially with Crowdfunded Cures is creating a kind of a clinical trial data marketplace using a kind of retroactive funding type arrangement. But you could really think of it like prizes, but we call them pay for success contracts or bounties even. But there's a bunch of different names for them: advanced market commitments, subscription style payment models. But basically, it's just about putting a price on clinical trial data, and that's actually what's valuable. When you pay for a new patented drug, you're not actually for the molecule itself. The molecule is usually quite cheap to produce and manufacture, relatively speaking, to the clinical trials and the clinical trial data showing that molecule is safe and effective, and basically the treatment protocol. So pretty excited about this space, DeSci generally, being able to kind of create these marketplaces. I got into this space through my brothers. They have done sort of early crypto investors, and they've got a few projects. And but through my legal background, I've been advising a few projects, starting sort of from back in the ICO days. And last year we kind of reached out to Vita and found a really awesome sort of community of scientists there. So really excited about DeSci generally and this whole space, and using basically crypto to fix a lot of the misaligned incentives under the patent system for medical research.
Yeah, fantastic. It's really surely there's so many applications of things that we have already that can be repurposed, and I think it's what you're doing. Crowdfunded Cures is got incredible potential to really make things accessible to people that are already out there in terms of just applying our existing knowledge. So Laurence, please, if you'd like to do your own introduction, round things off, we can start to discussing, I guess, maybe the some bigger topics around the relationship between funding and IP.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm excited about this space. We can talk about DeSci, the hottest new Web3 field after DeFi and ReFi. I sorry we missed each other for the first episode, but it worked out best because I definitely can talk more about the funding and the IP ownership aspects and how we do things at Vita DAO. So Vita DAO is sort of the first DAO, decentralized community, to fund real-world research. And how does a DAO kind of do that and hold IP rights? Well, with IP NFTs, by it's a framework created by the Molecule DAO. I personally am an entrepreneur and investor, trying to scientific method and engineering approach sort of to impact. I'm really kind of a citizen scientist. I apply the scientific method in every aspect of my thinking, including to what I spend my time on to make the biggest difference. And that's Vita DAO and the longevity space to kind of bring aging under medical control. I really think that traditional medicine, pharma, drug development, and GMI not going to make it. Just like traditional finance and banks and so on, not going to make it. So I come from a technical background, computer science. I didn't see initially a high impact way to contribute to medicine. It's kind of a slow moving field, and especially I'm from Romania, so I didn't really see a point in being a medical doctor, a clinician. I was kind of introverted as well. I like solving problems, not kind of talking to people that don't want to listen to the right way to kind of take care of themselves and so on. And so biotech is really kind of a really good fit for me with my tech background and trying to solve problems in a very effective way, critical thinking skills applied, but also my passion for biology and medicine, especially with my sort of spending a lot of my childhood in hospitals and surgeries and so on. So I'm really, really mission aligned here. I'm a steward in the deal flow working group, longevity deal flow, kind of facilitate for the other members to source academic projects and biotech assets that we can fund to advance towards making therapeutics, things that medicine we can take. And we try to evaluate those projects' applications. We look at, we collaborate with a lot of the sort of domain experts. They are senior reviewers, kind of a scientific advisory board. We send them the proposals. We help incubate those projects. It's not just kind of an application and that's that, and not just with some feedback. Sometimes we even spin out a biotech company ourselves. You leverage our huge community of biotech operators, longevity enthusiasts that can kind of help spin out the company, work with a bunch of CROs and with the PI, the principal investigator of the project, to direct that research and make it happen as fast as possible. Because as you might know, academia is quite slow, and we want to be way faster than traditional grants and bridge that value of that from just kind of research that kind of people read in a paper, cool, but then nothing happens, right? There's no product. So we try to bridge that and bring projects to a stage where other VCs and pharma companies might want to fund or license those assets.
Yeah, it's awesome to hear the three different approaches, honestly, or the three different perspectives, I guess, on funding that you all bring to this conversation, and all tremendous work that you've all done. Really inspiring for myself and so many others already. So it's exciting to think about where we're going to be going with the future of DeSci, with what we've already accomplished. So really stoked for Vita DAO and Molecule's recent raise. Crowdfunded cures, it's just totally unlocking so many things, and it's unlocking so much data. And so with that being said, today's topic is funding, IP, and ownership, and that the accessibility. Basically, I think all three of your work, your projects are removing some sort of middle person or middle aspect, and that's really a fundamental concept of Web3 is removing these middlemen, whether that's in finance or whether that's in direct access or in communication to funding or to individuals who are the experts who are working on a problem. And so, I think you've all really come up with some tremendous solutions towards that. So, but what is that? If you want to start this conversation about the relationship between these things, how is how can we maybe, or what are your perspectives on the relationship between funding and us? Let's just start there.
Well, here's a simple one. It costs money to create IP of value, typically, right? That's probably the most obvious and simple, but that unpacks into a lot of things, right? If you're trying to create data that is, that other people would actually pay money for and use, it might take you 1 week, 1 month, 1 year or more, right? And so, and maybe, you're creating the data for other uses, but monetizing the data itself can count too. So that's, perhaps the most obvious. But then how do you go about getting the funding, right? Do you, to create this IP in general? And there's tradition, there's Web3 ways, and there's overlap too. So, I mean, maybe I'm stating the obvious, but that to me is what really matters. And I think it's great that Web3 has a lot of new tools that can help to get that funding, right? Like the other two speakers have talked about. Ocean itself has a grants program called Ocean DAO, where people are, getting funding for projects working on data marketplaces and data sharing, or even creating and unlocking data itself, right? So that is, there's monthly grants that people can apply for and get. And that's helped to, unlock a lot of data. And thanks.
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting. I was on the call yesterday. Ocean is moving towards a retroactive funding model for grants. And so much of IP, I guess, is retroactive funding, right? Technically, if you put the work in and you get the actual property, then you monetize it after the fact. And that's how the data publication on Ocean works as well, right? You do something and you produce data, or you produce an algorithm, you publish it, and then the market decides what the value is, or you can set your own price, whatever it is. But the funding comes after the work is published. Versus the traditional grants program, I guess something more like what Vita DAO is doing now. You have a grants program where people can submit proposals. Have some background and previous work to demonstrate their expertise and ability to deliver on their proposal. But a lot of times the granting process is done proactively, right? Grants are issued, work is done, there's milestones, and then there's follow-up, and there's potential future funding. But what is the and I know I'm sure you have plenty of things to talk about this, Trent, because with the recent move to the announcement of moving to retroactive with Ocean. But maybe just any of you, if Savva or Laurence would like to comment on the impact of, or the incentives, I guess, to produce knowledge and then share it as well.
Yeah, it definitely costs a lot of money, right? To, for example, take a drug or even discover a molecule and then test it in mice and test it in humans and all of that. Now we can separately go into a thread sometime on why it costs so much and so on. But for now, let's assume within the current system, it costs a lot of money, right? So that's why you kind of need IP for now. That's one way to kind of take, to have that monopoly given to you, right? Once you have that specific composition of matter, that molecule, and have a certain amount of years that you can be the only one that sells it. And you say, well, this is my property, right? My intellectual property. This molecule for this specific indication, for this disease, only I can market and sell it. And we can look at Vita DAO, right? Like we try to get IP rights or licensing rights so that we can have profits on the things we fund, so that we can be sustainable longevity as an organization. because otherwise we give all the money away and then that's it, right? We need to recycle those profits back into the treasury and hopefully fund more research and so on. But obviously that's the current sort of way of doing things, but we could design better ways. And one, of course, is the pay for success, kind of like a prize, right? You set up something, you say, we as a society value this many billion or whatever for curing or 50% reduction in the symptoms or delay of symptom or of severe symptoms for Alzheimer's disease, for example. And we can even make, okay, this is how much we're going to get in taxes, so this is going to pay for itself if people can be healthy for longer and be productive and happy and so on. And life insurance companies as well. Now, Savva is the best person probably to talk about pay for success. This is his bread and butter.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, kind of coming at it from a legal side of things, but also from the crypto side, I see things in terms of contracts and creating, and contracts are basically about multiple parties coming together and creating value in a way that exceeds, the value that they put in. So kind of win-win from everyone. And the problem is that under the traditional patent system, the contract, there are significant gaps in the contract or distortions. And, particularly for traditional IP where you say have to exclude other people from having access to certain things or data. And as we know, particularly in the case of public goods and things that are very valuable, like open source software, things like that, it's difficult to create a business model around developing these things, and it can often be expensive to develop. That's the main problem with, in fact, I think this is the problem why we haven't had open sort of business models come into pharma and medicine, is because clinical trials are so expensive. But, we can work on that on the supply side, so make decentralized trials and, organizations like LabDAO looking at that sort of thing and other organizations. But you can also drive demand for that clinical trial data through these pay-for-success models using a contractual mechanism, but essentially creating like a kind of, I guess, a new kind of IP or a quasi-IP right, where the IP is your right to receive an outcome payment under, a pay-for-success contract, which has certain criteria or you can look at concepts like impact certificates or what they call hyper research. They've been talking a lot about that at Protocol Labs and Funding the Commons, where essentially you measure some output, some sort of impact output that you want. And I think with health, that's not an intractable problem. Like, we all want longer, healthier lives. And in fact, payers like traditional government agencies and health insurers value medicines on the basis of this thing called a quality adjusted life year. So, and they're usually willing to pay around sort of $30,000 per quality, but it could even be, up to $100,000 for sort of end stage cancer or rare disease, things like that. So, you can create, you can convert data, clinical trial data or a treatment protocol into qualities under a smart contract or a hypercert, and create marketplaces which are a lot more efficient than the current system, where all of the R&D energy, billions and billions of dollars, is being spent on trying to find novel molecules, which may be less effective than existing molecules or existing treatments, sort of off-patent treatments, or even diets or supplements or lifestyle interventions or plant medicines or psychedelics. There's a whole bunch of therapies out there where the funding is just minuscule compared to how much funding is put into finding novel therapeutics, novel molecules that might not be that effective from sort of society's perspective, from a patient's perspective who just wants to get better. They don't necessarily care that, they've got the latest most patentable medicine out there. They just want to be alleviated or potentially cured from their disease and treated for the cause of their disease. So that's what these models, I think, allow and basically potentially could outcompete traditional pharma if we can sort of allow them to scale.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I just realized, honestly, there's it's a very biology, I guess, biotech focus right now. Maybe that's just my perspective as a biologist and my bias in the projects that I've been drawn to and have been following. But maybe that's because of the pharma, the issue of, like you're talking about with sort of the nature of funding with pharma and the hurdles to producing a new drug, which is the clinical trials and funding required to do that, and the IP structure around it. I think maybe that system is more addressable, I guess, or I reckon that there's a bigger impact in terms of compared to other sciences. But just a random side note. But yeah, the impact of really funding these medicines, and especially with plant medicines, that's something really near and dear to me personally. I've been working in the cannabis space now for 20 years, or roughly, more professionally for the past, in the molecular biology realm since I finished my PhD for the past 6 years. And so really working on developing and the research side of things and unlocking the hundreds of therapeutic molecules that are in cannabis already that are not really being explored in terms of their therapeutic applications. More specifically, there's hundreds of things there. So just plant medicines, things like SciDAO, funding psychedelic research. Access to that sort of funding has not been available in these sorts of areas. Traditionally, it's been harder to get funding due to the bias and taboo around some of these subjects and the lack of structure around applying plant medicines in the framework of traditional medicine. So yeah, it's interesting I think there's going to be a lot of impact there in terms of opening up new fundings and new access of things that are really, again, right under our fingertips, like you're doing with crowdfunded cures.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, it's just, plant medicines is huge and psychedelics. One thing we're looking at with SciDAO at the moment is an open ketamine project. So it turns out that sort of the generic or the off-patent version of ketamine is actually more effective to treat treatment-resistant depression than the patented version, which is S-ketamine. It's the left-handed molecule. So it's just a situation where the current inability to enforce a monopoly price or create a business model using patents is resulting in a less effective product being used by patients. And then also patients that get off-label have to go to private clinics because it's off-label, it won't be reimbursed by health insurers, and the doctors have to take on the risk of prescribing off-label, so it ends up being very expensive, sort of over $1,000 in the US and over $6,000 in the UK. So, you have patients actively being harmed because of lack of access to what could potentially be a very safe and effective therapy. And the same with psilocybin as well, although there are some legal issues around that. Developing optimal treatment protocols in combination with therapy, which talking therapy is another example of something that is not, you can't enforce a monopoly price over a talking therapy. And there's no private incentives to develop better versions, because once you publish it, everyone can sort of apply it. So yeah, just lots of, I think, opportunities to sort of create essentially business models for generating data, because that's kind of what we're all looking for. That's what doctors, when you go to the doctor and you're sick, a doctor is not looking up what's the most expensive medicine. They're just looking up, well, what's the best treatment for you, the best treatment protocol, and they'll go through, they'll go through training, and they apply data based on the existing data they have and the tests and DNA and blood tests that they can get from you. They'll come up with a treatment protocol. And this is all just data, but it's not at the moment skewed towards, if you work in pharma, it's very skewed towards just making new patentable molecules. So which sort of throws everything else out of the usually other things are seen as like alternative medicine, quote unquote, and not real medicine, but just because they're not as profitable.
Yeah, to riff on that, I think the last the last few minutes have been around how a lot of the way that the IP system is set up right now with patents copyright and more is problematic in many ways, and there's more and more cracks appearing in the system with every passing year. And it's pretty interesting, right? Because when this stuff was first developed, it was actually there to protect the innovator, the creatives, right? In the first industrial revolution, people were inventing like pretty cool things like the next steam engine, etc. And at first it was all getting ripped off, right? But then the UK introduced patents to help protect these inventors so that they could monetize and keep inventing, right? And a similar story with people making creative books, like works such as books and so on, right? But I think what's happened over time, especially, like basically it's gotten gamed, right? Just like we see in Web3, things get gamed here and there. And it's gotten especially badly gamed in the last 20, 30, 40. And I mean, a lot of the system was developed 100 years ago plus. So it's, hard to anticipate that where it could be possibly gamed, and it has been very slow to evolve, right? But I think with Web3, it points to a lot of opportunities where you could try to rewire and get the government to change their policies. And there is evolution there, but it tends to be slow, 5 years, 10 years, 15 years at a time. But at the same time, you can kind of work around it in a few ways. One way, one question to ask is, how does, Web3 reconcile with IP? Because Web3 offers sort of two, and that's kind of the answer is, they're all if you invent something, if you create a song, if you have some data, how do you protect it? So the IP laws are there to protect your invention or song or otherwise. And if someone violates that, then you have to recourse to the existing courts and otherwise, the existing system. But with Web3, there's potentially other ways, right? You could have it where, say, your data is simply, people can't access the data directly and they can only run algorithms against the data. So now you're no longer relying on any existing IP laws to hopefully, hope that no one takes the data and uses it in the wrong way. It's just like leveraging advances in technology such that you're protected that way. It's sort of like a trade secret for data, right? But this this applies in many places. So, and there's many people have conceptualized this over the years. There's a great piece, Abo, more than 10 years ago on wet code versus dry code. So wet code is the traditional laws, etc., and then dry protection by traditional laws, and then dry code is protection by crisp smart contracts, crisp computers, etc. And so that's one framing, and it tends to be more efficient, right? 10x or more efficient, so qualitatively different. More recent framing that I saw, which I really like, actually, Andre Cronje wrote about this, is rights versus powers. So traditionally, you have rights, copyright rights when you create a work or whatever. And powers is simply like, what can you do? And so if I own an NFT, that means I simply have the private key to that address, but it means that I can send that NFT else. I don't have any other rights, but I have the power to send that NFT to someone else. And that gives the thing value. So I think this new idea of wet code versus dry code, of rights versus powers, we can leverage here and help to separate, how has traditional intellectual property law been helpful versus how to protect creators of various types versus the new tools. And in many cases, why not have your cake and eat it too? Leverage the traditional protections as well as the modern protections, and then you're doubly protected.
Yeah, great points, Trent, there. I can speak, especially with the way Vita DAO funds research through these IP NFTs, right? It's not just like an NFT where you can just transfer it, but you have no rights. And it's also not stuck in the 20th century where you just have a wet ink legal contract. It's kind of trying to bring those legal contracts into onto the blockchain so that you can easily transfer them, you can easily have liquidity, fractionalize them, borrow against them, and things like that. So it's just simply a legal contract that references the NFT address, and then the IP NFT holds and references the MeetSpace legal contract. So you kind of have double reference and binding between them. So yeah, for now, we still use that, right? But in the future, we're hoping that it's all going to be on chain even further, that we don't need IP anymore, and we can have other types of incentives that are set up to reward you for putting in $1 billion to develop that thing, maybe even less because you're doing it in a decentralized way. But then you get a certain return on investment in another way, and then people can work and efficientize the actual development of the molecule, the drug. Actually, it's mostly not actually going to be small molecules anymore, right? It's we're going towards smarter drugs. You've seen with the COVID vaccines, right? You just have the code of a certain protein you want for the virus, right? Or you can do that for anything else you might want to do in the body. You have an mRNA, put it in a nanoparticle, lipid nanoparticle, but you can of course still put it in other types of vectors, in virus and so on, that you can inject it into to transfect cells and do whatever you'd like, or either in vivo or ex vivo engineer some cells to do whatever you would like. It's just kind of like sending mini robots into the body to do whatever you'd like. That's still intellectual property, but do you really? It's not like the small molecules anymore. First of all, they're much smarter. There are less side effects because metabolism is complicated. With a small molecule, you usually have affinity to multiple proteins, multiple pathways. So this way, there is a lot of cost in developing and proving that these things work, but there's also a lot of cost in manufacturing these cell therapies and gene therapies and so on. And so you can allow the free market to innovate there. There was, I remember, discussion with these mRNA vaccines that we should kind of open up the patents and allow India and all these countries to just do their own manufacturing and maybe, sure, pay some license fees or so on. But actually, why not just give Pfizer or whoever a 10x return, and then it's open for the whole world, the whole society to move fast, innovate, scale that up with no restrictions whatsoever. The society, so like that's why we take taxes, right, to kind of have things that are public goods, and overcome that tragedy of the commons, right?
I think that's wonderful, right? And to riff on that, actually, you had this halfway through what you said, this idea of what if we can go away from the traditional laws at all and pure dry code, and there's actually a tool for that Simon de Lariviere came up with, and I think it's beautiful. So the idea is Creative Commons. It's a set of contracts where you can basically license whatever you created to the world, such that you're basically giving up what you would otherwise have as copyright rights, right? So in this case, CC0 is basically telling the world that they can use IP, your copyrighted work, however they want, right? Doesn't matter. There's no strings attached at all. So the idea is, as soon as you publish a work that would otherwise be copyrighted, whether it's data or something else, and you can do the same thing for patents with IP like that, patent IP, you immediately license it as CC0. And then after that, all that's left is powers, who has the private key for the NFT, etc. And then there's great value that still can be created, right? Like you do this with songs, and suddenly you have, lots of artists that can go and remix songs without worrying, right? The Beastie Boys have said, if they had got going now, trying to do what they're doing, they would have never been able to do anything because everything is all, they would spend way too much time trying to license all the work that they remix, right? But if the cultural bias towards CC0 of everything, then you can remix all you want. And what matters is provenance, and people buy for that, right? We see this all the time in NFT land. So by basically explicitly turning off the traditional stuff using CC0 or equivalent contract, then it goes pure dry code. And one final example, Radiohead, about 10 years ago, they had already done like 5 or 6 albums, including many hit albums. Then they did a new album where they made it for free to download, and anyone can download, but then you could tip Radiohead if you liked it. They made more money from tips of that album than any of their previous albums combined. Sorry. So maybe that's an inspiration even for the pharma space or otherwise, right? So, you can have government funding, but also tips can count for a lot. So anyway, I think there's some really cool directions we can go here, and there's great ideas emerging in space.
Yeah, that's great. I'd love to hear more about that, because obviously I can see how it works in the art space, where it's more about word of mouth marketing, things like that, right? And then people donating and appreciating and so on. And then in the sort of medical space, if you have but where you're kind of trying to recoup your billions of dollars that you've invested in developing that thing, and then someone else just sells it for $1. Well, in order to recoup it, you would need a huge profit margin after the fact. So like you have all your costs before the thing is on the market, and then it's on the market, but a huge sort of profit margin. And if obviously if it's open, then anyone can put it for a lot less. So then your margins get minimized. So you have it gets commoditized. It's great for the society, but it's not great for the entity that developed and made all that investment. So either we as a society reward them and then they make it open, right? That's where pay for success can come in, even for novel therapeutics. But I'd obviously love to explore more, because I'm kind of wondering, you've got this person that's got Alzheimer's and they want to reverse their Alzheimer's. Would they really care to pay $10,000 instead of $5 for gene therapy? Like, why would they do that, right? They just care about the value they get, and probably they would take the cheaper one. Most people, right? Not the one that's OG, that actually developed the specific composition of matter that cured them.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really great thing to explore and brainstorm, right? I mean, if you say I demand to get paid for the thing up front, which is sort of the status quo, then you're stuck with the status quo, right? Whereas if you quite often, people do like freemium type models, right, where maybe the base thing is free, but then there's value add on top, right? So maybe it's around the delivery or the distribution, or who knows, right? Or maybe people are willing to pay for the brand in some way. Like lots of people are willing to pay twice as much for Coca-Cola compared to one of 10 other clones, right? Why is that? Because there's a brand. I don't think, patent IP is one way to protect, but also simply trademark or implicit trademark simply by brand, right? I think that's maybe part of it, but there's probably much better solutions than that, right? Some of these impact ideas that have been talked about, where you're, paid for an outcome, and there can be sort of collective funding around that. I think there's great potential in that.
Yeah, I mean, totally. From my perspective, it's and what Trent was saying is there have been a lot of gains made from using traditional IP and basically allowing that to scale. But what we need is other kind of models that can sort of leverage the same sort of thing, same kind of scalable model. And things like prizes have been talked about. And prizes are actually a lot more consistent with the idea of open source. It's kind of like a patent buyout, sort of basically like the society comes along and goes to Pfizer, okay, we'll pay you $100 million or whatever, or $1 billion or $10 billion, and then we open source the patents for your new drug. But that's not necessarily... that's not necessary, I think, for things that can be protected with a patent and where you can monopolize it, because, you can actually come up with an appropriate market model, I think, when somebody has a patent and a price, subject, of course, to, sorting out these patent thicket issues. So obviously, we should also encourage open source models, and particularly for basic research or sort of early stage research. We don't really want to lock things up like with CRISPR and things like that. But with a prize model, the really interesting thing, and this is what we're really excited about at Crowdfunded Cures, is that you can create this entirely new marketplace for stuff that's just hasn't really been looked at all by the private industry, which is basically a super intelligence. You've got the ability to get 10,000 engineers to work on making a better iPhone, getting up in the morning whether they like it or not, because, you've got patents and traditional IP that protects the iPhone, and you've got branding that also provides sort of protection around the goodwill. But, if you invent a better talking therapy or repurpose an off-patent drug, or you look at a better version of a plant medicine, then those things traditionally you can't build a business model around. You can't have these scalable effects. But I think Web3 and smart contracts, and particularly, having these things, as you say, executed with dry code, creates a lot of efficiencies and a lot of potential to scale and for Web3 basically to have real world impact on things, not just kind of talking about it, but and also, beyond just, access to finance and liquidity and things like that.
Yeah, it really brings it full circle. And I think it's kind of the theme here, and referencing back to one of your articles from a couple of years ago, Trent, the Web3 sustainability loop, right? And that happens in the creation of value and the evaluation of value, right? It goes beyond, I guess, financialization and what we can do here in Web3.
Absolutely, yeah. And actually, I think it's great with Web3. You can conduct experiments on various ways to fund quickly. Within Ocean itself, we have done forward-looking grants, retroactive grants, prizes, bounties, MOU contracts, and traditional salary type setups, right? So, and some things work better than others. It kind of depends what you want. For example, a bounty works well if you know the specs that you want, and there's a well-defined outcome, and you don't really need someone to be sticking around to maintain it afterwards. Prize is, where you kind of know some specs, but after that, you just want teams to compete. So each of these has the different pros and cons, and it's been really wonderful to leverage the tools of Web3 to explore this. And the community and the culture of Web3 has been up for being part of this overall experiment, right? So. I just know the ocean ecosystem the best, but we've seen lots of these experiments happen across the board with 20 or 50 other protocols too, and DAOs and grants and stuff, and it's just really great to see.
Yeah, this has been a fantastic episode number 2 of Decentralized. Thank you again to our guests and our audience, everyone in attendance, the entire Crypto Sapiens crew. So yeah, it's been fantastic. I appreciate everyone.